Well, we can just dive into it. Thank you so much for
Okay.
joining me on the podcast. I appreciate you being here and talking about this subject because it's something that I think is near and dear. The idea of unplugging, disconnecting, especially getting our kids on board with that. This is just
Yeah.
topic of conversation right now. So I can't wait to dive deeper into your book. But why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Hannah, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so excited to be here. So thank you for having me. My name is Hannah Brencher. I'm a writer and author, and I am an online educator. So I teach people the power of routines and disciplines, specifically in my own personal story from a perspective of like mental health and like living at an optimized level of mental health. But, especially I think that was a shift for me in becoming a mom. It's like suddenly it was all the more important to have my own rhythms and disciplines and to be able to cultivate mental health. And so that's kind of what I'm about.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I think that it probably goes without saying that a lot of us want to change the relationship that we have with our phones.
Yeah,
That's I think again, this is resonating with people because we got ahead of ourselves with how connected we are. And I think we're just trying to course correct at this point. But I'm curious to know more about your story and why you decided to start pursuing the path of just communicating the why to people.
totally. I'm somebody who grew up sort of straddling that line between digitally connected, age of the internet, AOL Instant Messenger, all of that. And I've always had a very like deep, fond love for digital connectivity. Like my whole entire career is online. And I do love the power of social media. But over the last however many years, I think I didn't realize that it was starting to take from me and was starting to burn me out. And it was like slowly happening in the way that it was like subtle enough that I didn't really key into the fact of like, oh, I'm not the person that I was when I stepped onto these platforms. And not the same person in the sense of like, yes, we grow, we evolve, we hopefully change, but like also there were really good elements of me that I feel like are not as vibrant anymore. And so it all kind of came to a head in 2021. It was in the midst of the pandemic that was never ending. And I think a lot of us, we built a lot of habits in that pandemic around our devices because our devices were the main lifeline for us. We needed them, they were our connection source. But I remember in like 2021, like mid 2021, feeling like, okay, but I don't want to feel this connected anymore. And I need to reclaim parts of myself because I'm constantly on the phone. And I had started to notice that my daughter, who was a little bit over a year old, she was reaching for my phone and wanting to grab it and hold it. And that made sense because I was always grabbing it and holding it. And it was my 33rd birthday, I was sitting having like a quiet, reflective time. I often treat my birthday like it's a second new year of like, what could we make happen, you know? And I remember just sitting there and feeling particularly exhausted and burnt out. And I felt this nudge that just said, turn off your phone. And I knew in that moment, it wasn't like turn off your phone once. It was more so like this invitation to turn off my phone and keep turning off my phone. And what came from that was a cultivation of a daily rhythm of unplugging. And that's what I thought it would be, a daily rhythm. I had no idea that it was going to change my life so dramatically.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, I didn't even mention the name of your book. It's The Unplugged Hours,
Yeah.
Cultivating a Life of Presence in a Digitally Connected World. And you're obviously the author of this. You're a TED speaker, entrepreneur. And so I think it is hard well, one, you're wanting to get this message out into the world. So I think there is this conundrum that we feel as not influencers, but like creators of like,
Mhm.
what's the fine line? What's the balance of being here or being present here with getting this message out and then going tech free for however long per day. So what does it look like for you right now? How long are you tech free throughout your day?
Well, so it varies every single day. So typically, like there are pockets of the day where I am unplugged. So I like to start my morning being completely unplugged, not on my phone. I like to spend my lunch breaks typically being unplugged when I'm with my daughter, like in the afternoon, early evening. We have some unplugged time. I like to do very focused work. So I may still be plugged into a computer, like in a Word doc writing. But my attention is focused on a single task rather than monotasking or flipping between browsers. And then I would say the sweet spot is in the evenings. That's really where I love to unplug because the day is unwinding, the work is over, and it is a way to get a break and then fill my tank back up. But I do feel like it's important to note, like, I'm not perfect. None of us are perfect. And so there are definitely still nights where I'm like, I would much rather scroll than to read a book right now or to do something that looks like self care. But I have to ask myself that question of like, do I want to choose the better option for myself? Do I want to choose the
Mhm.
thing that I think is helping me, but it's not really helping me? Or do I really
Mhm.
want to fill my tank thoughtfully? And so the reason I call it the unplugged hours is just because it's literally really an hour by hour thing. And so there can be a day where I literally unplug for just 1 hour, and that 1 hour might be the best hour of my day. And so it's that invitation to take it hour by hour rather than like this unrealistic overhaul of like, I'm going tech free or I'm wiping it off from my phone. We take it hour by hour.
Yeah, absolutely. So this, I swear this is this is related, but I shared for my minimalist moment slash resource. I do that at the beginning of all my episodes, whether I'm having a moment of the week that I pursue minimalism and or just give a resource. But all that to say, a
Yeah,
couple weeks ago, I had shared a podcast by Ryan Holiday, and he wrote the book The Daily Stoic and several
love him.
others. Yeah, I love him too. But he had a girl, and now I don't remember her name, but they were talking about shadow work. Shadow work is not what I want to talk about, but at the beginning of that, they were talking about journaling and how the journaling process in itself, if we're trying to do it on our phones, it's not a
Mm,
place that we are guaranteed not to be interrupted. And that really spoke to me because I'm like, yeah, that's even when I'm on my computer, I'll see an email come in, or I'll just want to check the news, or I'll think about something. Just the fact that we can so easily be distracted. But I think that's with anything.
yeah.
So when I'm
Mhm.
doing my Bible study in the morning, it'll make me think of something. And then I start Googling and I go over to this next window.
Yep.
Anything that I'm doing on my phone, I just think we have to um, not restructure, but we may need to rethink what when we're using it, if it can be replaced by, again, a journal, a calendar
Mhm.
that's tangible, a book, because I just think the distraction is so prevalent and, I don't wanna be distracted.
Yeah, but totally. I mean, it's all right there. So,
Yeah.
like, in the same way that, because I'll notice it where it's like I'm doing my Bible study, and if the phone is in my vicinity, then I'll be like, oh, well, I'm just going to go and look up that verse or that commentary. And then before I know it, I'm checking the weather app, I'm checking a banking app, I'm over here, I'm probably on social media. And so I love that idea of like anchoring these things throughout the day with like, is there an alternative way to do this that allows me to feel more peace? So I'll give you just an example. This past Friday, I was like, I have this thing called the Monday Club, and it's an email that comes out every Monday. And I like to batch that work. I like to have a few emails scheduled, ready to go, rather than just to write them on the fly. It just makes everything operate smoothly. But all day, I knew that I needed to like sit down and write, and I just wasn't focused. I was kind of all over the place. Oh, I'll check an email over here. I'll put out a fire over here. And at the end of the day, I powered down the phone. I pulled out a yellow notebook, which is like my medium of choice. And in that next 90 minutes, I did more in the 90 minutes than I had done all day just by being focused on a single task in front of me and no distractions, as you said. But I walked away from it feeling so much better. Like, oh, it was right here. I just had to focus in and dare to close out all the other distractions, which is hard. It's hard to do that.
I wanna talk about you have an idea of 1,000 unplugged hours. It reminds me of 1,000 hours outside. 1,000 you need to, like, do you have a hashtag for this? 1,000 unplugged hours?
Loosely, I feel
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, no, this is
I
good. This
wasn't intending to start a bigger thing, you know? I just was like, here's the thing that changed my life.
No,
Have it.
it should be something that we try and track and measure in our lives, even if it's just, like a loosely held knowledge of how much we're off the phone. But tell me
Yeah.
more about the 1,000 unplugged hours and why you wanna challenge people to get to that number.
Yeah. So when I knew I wanted to start turning off my phone, I am very much like a metrics person in the sense of I believe you can't really manage what you don't measure. And so I needed a way to measure how many hours I was actually unplugged or if there was a goal at large. And so I kind of did the math and was like, okay, 1,000 hours in a year equates to about 3 to 4 unplugged hours a day. Or if you are like choosing to like practice Sabbath or take like a digital break on the weekend, you can very easily get like 8 to 12 hours racked in that time. And so I built a tracker for myself. I literally created it in Canva and I just started tracking my unplugged hours every time I powered down. And I didn't share about it until I had completed the challenge entirely for myself because I wanted to be mindful of like, I'm not trying to like make this something larger. It wasn't even something I thought that I would write a book about, but I have been blown away by the way in which those hours have stacked up and have changed me and have given back parts of me that I didn't even know that I was missing, you know? And when I first started unplugging and I set that goal for myself, I thought I would hit 1,000 hours and I would be like some sort of like an expert in this area. And when I realized pretty quickly, it was like the 1,000 hours were like the baseline. And then from there, it was actually where I started to see like some real crazy results from it. And so it was a reminder to me of like your small decisions add up, your hours add up to this bigger thing. But I always tell people like, if you want to take on the challenge, that's wonderful. I might start with a smaller challenge. We have 100-hour trackers on the website simply because if you're going from never unplugging to like wanting to unplug for 1,000 hours, it may be a pretty big overhaul, a pretty big goal. And you kind of have to train yourself to get into that posture of powering down. But I also had a realization, I think it was at hour 800, where I realized, okay, but like even if I don't hit this goal. I'm on track to hit
Mhm.
this goal. But even if I don't hit this goal, can I look back at what I have done already and just decide to be proud of that? I'm so used to being proud of when the goal is hit, but
Yeah.
I've learned to become proud in the process.
Absolutely. I think for me, when you said you do it in the evenings, I love listening to a podcast when I cook dinner. And so
Yeah.
to me, I'm like, oh, so that does that time need to be silent for me? Maybe I should be silent, or maybe I need to pull my kids into the kitchen and use that time to talk to them. So I think that'll be an
Mhm.
evolution as they continue to grow and I figure out what it looks like for me. But it does make me feel uncomfortable and or I don't want to say scary. It's not scary. But I think for people, they do have some fear in unplugging. So how would you encourage them in that way to combat those fears?
Yeah, I would say first, yes, it is absolutely uncomfortable. And I don't know that it ever gets less uncomfortable. Here I am on the other side of like thousands of hours of unplugged, and I still feel a resistance. And I think that's because we feel resistance towards the things that actually matter to us. Like we feel resistance when we go to do a workout, we feel resistance when we go to do a quiet time, you know? But I would say, like, there was a mentor of mine in college who would always say, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's always been like a guiding marker for me. It's like, oh, if I'm feeling uncomfortable, it probably is an indicator that there's something here for me. And the other thing that I would say to encourage people is, like if you can't start with an hour, start with 15 minutes, start with 30 minutes. Think about something you said for such a long time you've wanted to do, whether that was like, I want to become a reader again because I have so many books, or I want to connect with my kids. I want to have intentional activities with my kids. Like, and then I would tell you, turn off your phone for that allotted time and do that thing. And then turn your phone back on and it will all be there. And you'll realize you have missed nothing, but you have gained something really precious. And so I'm not even like telling people, like, hey, you have to do 3 to 4 unplugged hours a day. you might do one and it may be such a life-giving hour, but I think it's that shifting in our mindset to realize this is not like a punishment. This is not like a, oh, I'm too plugged in. I need to be powered down. No, what you're doing is you're taking your time, which is your most precious resource, and you're reallocating it to things that you care about, to things that you actually want to do. Because I can't tell you the last time I scrolled on my phone and found like deeply meaningful things that I wanted to scroll through, like we walk away, we don't even remember what we did on our phones. And so, like, planting yourself deep in the present moment by starting to do the things you've said for a while. I want to do that thing.
Absolutely. In your book, you say, because you were feeling everything, you ended up feeling nothing. So, what did you mean by that? And then, how can we start to take action? Again, it's getting uncomfortable. It's feeling that friction. It's funny, the last interview I just did before you, she was talking about that friction. We were talking about finances and just being more intentional with our budget and our spending.
Yeah.
And she was like, lean into that friction. When it starts to get hard, you know you're on the right path to the freedom on the other side. So I'm curious,
Mhm.
when you felt everything, you ended up feeling nothing. How did you move through that?
Yeah, I think that was, looking back in the rearview mirror, I was able to see a lot of signs of burning out that I had not seen of like, oh, okay, like I'm feeling overwhelmed all the time, or I'm feeling irritable all the time, or like, I'm snapping at this person. And it's like, what's wrong with me? Like that's kind of how I was feeling. And that line in the book about feeling everything and as a result feeling nothing came from what I think is the information overload. I think especially in COVID, it's like, well, if I just scroll and I read these articles and I know these things, like then I'm gonna feel okay. But in actuality, it's information coming at every angle. It's headlines, it's news sources. This one contradicts that one. We're heading into an election season. It's the same thing over again, but our brains were not designed to take in this much information in this format. Like we were designed for long form. We were designed for one source at a time. And so one of the biggest warning signs for me of like something has to change, something has to shift is that I've always been a person who is like very much like heart on my sleeve, feel all the things, cry at the drop of a hat. That's a gift I've learned to hone over the years. And then that kind of wasn't there anymore. And I would get like news from friends, like, sad news or good news, more so like sad news that I wanted to feel. And I just felt like I couldn't. And I would read news articles that should have made me feel something. And I just felt kind of numb and desensitized and kind of a overarching form of like kind of apathy. Like it just felt like I couldn't care.
Mhm.
And that was a big red flag for me of like, no, no, no. If you cannot move through this life and feel deeply, if you cannot learn to like mourn and grieve again with your friends, something has to change because something is wrong. And I can thankfully say now, like, I am back to crying all the time. I'm feeling I'm not too desensitized to care about what is right in front of me. And that's a really beautiful thing.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about planning
Yeah,
the unplug time because again, I think we have a firm foundation on the why it's important to unplug. But I think for a lot of us, if we don't plan, then what's that phrase I'm trying to think of? If you don't, do you know?
plan to, was it like fail to plan, plan to fail? Is
Yeah,
that,
something like that.
yeah,
One of them.
there's like 1,000 of them.
Yeah. But on the other day, I think that we really do, especially with something that is difficult. Like you do use a plan if you're starting to
Yeah.
work out or run or budget. And so why would our unplugged hours be any different? So what advice do you have, maybe a few tips that you have for planning those unplugged hours?
Totally. I would start asking yourself the question of like, okay, what are the spaces in my life where I would ideally like to be fully present for them, and start there. So maybe it's dinners at the table. Maybe it is quiet time that you felt really distracted in lately. Maybe it's, what? I've seen so much research out there about not scrolling before bed. I would love to have a nighttime routine. And then I would just pick one to cultivate for a month's time and see how much you can actually practice that rhythm. And I would also say it's like it's not an all or nothing. It's not like a from now on, there are no phones at the dinner table. Like we can overhaul in that way. And for a select few, it works. But for most of us, it's like we need to ease into the rhythm. And
Yeah.
so if you're not even sitting at the dinner table, but you want to be, what would it look like for one night a week to start
Mhm.
practicing that? And then if everybody likes it, go to 2. And so it's more of like an 80-20 mentality and giving
Mhm.
yourself grace for the times that you fail or the times where it just doesn't happen because life happens. But it's you prioritizing things you said you wanted to be present for. And so,
Mhm.
like, I'm thinking about because I'm a habit tracker, I track all my habits and all that stuff. It's just how I know I'm progressing. And I had a habit that I was tracking a few months ago that was simply just intentional bedtime, like, which I feel like our bedtime was like pretty intentional to begin with, but I always felt this sense of like rushing through it because I wanted to get on to the next part of the day, because I wanted to like get downstairs where I could just, chill out and have a breather. But I started to practice that rhythm of like, what does it look like to move through this thoughtfully and intentionally and a little slower and to not have phones in the process.
Yeah.
And it was such a little life giving spot in my day. It wasn't an hour's worth of time. It was like 15 to 20 minutes, but we both felt really recharged by that rhythm.
Absolutely. I want to transition a little bit to all
Mhm,
my listeners that aren't Christian. You
mhm,
would have skipped through the next 5 minutes or so. But I think this message is so impactful. So I didn't want to do the whole thing from a Christian perspective necessarily, because I think this is really quality material that everyone needs. But I do want to
totally.
talk about your faith and how your faith was impacted by the overconsumption of technology and how important it is to encounter God and how technology can muddy that. So, talk a little bit more about that in your life.
Yeah, I think especially like talking from my space, like I am in the online space as a Christian author. So I am like in a sense, a content creator. And what I realized for me was that it became really easy to talk about God and share about God and package things up about God, but then not be cultivating that behind the scenes. And I've always done a quiet time. I've always made that a priority, but I was feeling like, man, like I'm really distracted. Or I'm coming into my quiet time being like, okay, God, like, what can I share with people? And that was not meant to be the relationship. It was not meant to be a transaction in that way. And so there's a spot in the book where I talk about how like it's a chapter called Maps, and I go into all the different things that I was feeling, like drawing a map for the reader of where I was before the unplugged hours began. And when I talk about faith, like I really feel like it's kind of like a secret garden, right? It's like this inner life, this inner room that we have. And to me, it had once been so vibrant and like over time just kind of lost its vibrancy or kind of lost its like, it stopped being a secret place so much as a place that I was just checking in and out of, and I wanted to get that back, and slowly over time, I've been able to, like, recultivate that space, and what's really beautiful is that I've learned it's not like a designated 30 minutes in the morning that you have to do this. I'm realizing that the more I clear out the noise, I can actually tap into the presence all throughout the day, which has been really beautiful for me. Like one of the rhythms from this summer has been I took my journaling Bible and I placed it on my countertop in my kitchen because it's an area that I frequent a lot. And
Mhm.
throughout the day, when I'm tempted to just stand at the counter and, like, reach for my phone, I'll test myself to just be like, "Could you open this instead?" And that doesn't mean that I don't, like, eventually just go and open my phone, that's not the point, but, like, I try to make a practice of opening up the Bible first. I'll read a line or 2, maybe I'll read a parable, I'll jot a few notes down, but I have encountered some of the sweetest, like, details and, like, what I would call intimacy from carving out that space, that little space of presence in an area where it would be really easy to not be present. And so I think that the faith is like evolving, like every day over time. But man, I think I felt really exhausted in the pursuit of faith for a long time. And it's gotten back to a place where it's like, oh, my faith has gone back to the thing that it was always meant to be, which is my lifeline, my safe space, my secret place away from the chaos of this world. So I do know on the other side of it that it's possible to cultivate that. And man, it makes me operate 10 times better having that.
Absolutely. There are 2 significant times in my life that I can remember, unplugging for a period of time. One was when I went to
Mhm.
Africa when I was 21 years old, and then the other was actually around the same time, same age. I went on a cruise for a week, and we didn't wanna pay for the cell phone, like the Wi-Fi. Anyways,
Yeah.
on the day with the cruise, coming back for that first day before I flew home to Ohio, I was in Texas. I didn't wanna pick up my phone, and this was, like, 15
Mhm.
years ago, and I was still already finding myself wanting to reach for my phone, and it wasn't even a smartphone at that point in time, but just being connected again. It was like, I don't wanna always be accessible, and
Yeah.
I think that was the hard thing was that yeah, I just think that we feel like people I don't know, like, with our old phones that we had in the '90s and the '80s, you had to wait, and if they didn't get your answer your call right then and there, leave a message and or you gotta call them back.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't
Mhm.
respond within a few minutes, and I hate that sometimes you'll forget, and I try not to do that, to forget to text people back or to call people back, but I just think I don't like the accessibility that we feel like we have to have from one another because that was never
Mhm.
a thing until recently, and then just quickly, the other instance was when I was in Africa, and there was something about being in the rural countryside of Kenya where I do feel like I could hear God clearly, because there was no
Mhm.
noise, there were no TVs there, there was no electronics. We were not allowed to take pictures where we were in this one space, and so it felt lovely, it felt refreshing, it felt like such a break, and I
Yeah.
think I'm so afraid now to disconnect, especially for the podcast thing, because 'cause I'm like, "Oh, I don't want people to forget," or like, "I don't want people to forget that I'm here," and so it keep us
Mhm.
connected, but it's like, I need to just trust that they won't and what I'm providing is good enough and I can always come back to it, and then I think if you're not someone that creates things, if you're not an influencer or a creator and
Yeah.
you're just afraid to disconnect, you can just always go back to it. Just breathe.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of why, the approach that I'm standing by is that I do believe that there's a balance. I think
Mhm.
right now in the culture, we're having a conversation of can there be a balance? And it's a
Yeah.
very much all or nothing. It's either like throw your phone away and be a digital minimalist. And I get that and I understand that. And for some people's lifestyle, that's beautiful that you can do that.
Mhm.
I have to check my email.
Yeah.
I want to be on social media. What a privilege that like years ago you would write a book and that was the only way that you could share your thoughts. What a privilege that we get to be able to encourage people, give people information, be these sources. Um, and I remember, like, I think it was like 2 or 3 months into unplugging that I kinda looked at social media and I was like, "I'm not having fun anymore." And if I'm not having fun anymore, I'm
Mhm.
not staying here because this is not, like, something I'm gonna choose to give so much of my time to and feel completely drained by it. And I started to tweak boundaries and tweak the way that I was showing up as I was implementing the unplugged hours that like I could eventually get to a space where now when I get on my phone, like I'm excited to engage. I'm excited to post. I'm excited to connect. But if I'm not in that mindset, I need to be very careful to say, it's not the time. I shouldn't be on this platform. It's not going to help me. And being able to go by moment with that. But to the point that you talked about with the accessibility, I think that's the hardest part is that we have started to cultivate a pretty unfair expectation of one another that you have to be accessible. And I've 1000% experienced that with some people in my life or people in my life where the running joke is like, oh, well, like Hannah like won't text back immediately, give her a few hours or whatever. And for a long time I apologized about that. And then I was like, wait, why am I apologizing for something that I actually think is really healthy and like maybe other people could implement? It's like we used to leave the house, like you said. There was an answering machine. There was an expectation of, I'm going to get back to you because I'm not too overloaded to get back to you. And For me, the shift has been one from away from this constant accessibility to one of what I call availability, meaning that I want to be available to the people that need me to be available to them. I want to not be so burnt out and overwhelmed that I can't show up for my people. And I think that's the trade off with the accessibility. We think we're checking all the boxes because we are accessible, but when we have nothing left to give to the people that we are meant to serve and be there for, like, that's actually a bigger problem. And that's a lot of times because we're giving all of that energy to people that don't even know us, you know? Like, because I felt that too, where it's like, oh, well, if I get offline or if I'm not online this weekend or whatever, people are going to forget or I'm not going to be relevant anymore. And I had to say, okay, you know what? That is not, I don't actually get to choose that. I don't get to decide that. I can show up and I can give people like whatever I feel like I need to give them, hope or encouragement or a piece of writing that I've written. But if I can't step away and be okay, I need to change something
Yeah.
because that was really wrecking my peace.
Mhm. I do think with great power comes great responsibility, as they say.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do think about that often with, yeah, what a blessing to be a part of a society, culture, time period where we have this kind of technology. We have, this is just even outside of technology, but like we have so much food available to us. We have all these activities.
Yeah.
No one in the history of the world has ever been as fortunate as us. But I think that actually that is kind of a blessing and a curse because now we
Yep.
have the ability to tune into our selfish sides, our indulgent sides, our lack of
Mhm.
discipline sides. And so I think with my faith, I'm constantly wrestling, okay, God, I see the blessing, but I'm also seeing like this other side to where the overabundance can be not healthy. And so we still have to choose to walk an intentional line, an intentional path to say, it's too much. I want to opt out. And I think
Yeah.
that's what we have to reconcile when it comes to our phone usage. This is great, but we're starting to be overindulgent. And that's where it's a curse to us, honestly.
Absolutely, and it's I see that, I see that in my daughter, where
Mhm.
if she's got too many options, she
Yeah.
starts to kind of freak out a little bit, right?
Mhm.
Because she wants this and she wants this and she wants this. I see it manifest in like princess dresses.
Yeah.
But I'm like, it's actually no different than me, where I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, well, when I hold this phone, I'm like, oh, there's always another app, there's always another recipe, there's always
Yeah.
another thing to buy on Amazon. And one of the sweetest feelings has become now like, and this took a little while to get to this place, but like when I turn off my phone, typically at the end of the day, there's almost like this sigh of relief of like, oh, it's all right here. It's all right here. And that mentality that I was never going to have enough, that like there wasn't enough to go around, like all of that was actually coming from my connective habits. And it was something I had to learn to like reprogram myself from because like what was really in front of me was good. But if you're too distracted to see that it's good, you're always going to want something more, whether that is you're single and you want a relationship, then you have the relationship and you want marriage, then you have marriage and you want kids, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's the same thing as like, oh, well, if I could just get that next thing, oh, if I could just buy that next product. Sometimes, like, I would find myself, and I still do, going to Home Goods. What do you need at Home Goods? Probably nothing. I don't think there's anything at Home Goods that we actually need, but it's more so, oh, maybe I'm feeling stressed. Maybe I'm feeling overwhelmed. Maybe I'm feeling this. And so I will go and seek out another option. And I think that's actually the core of what's happening with our phones is like we get on our phones and we say that we're checking in, but a lot of times we're actually checking out from what's right in front of us or a feeling that we don't want to face about what's right in front of us that we actually need to grapple with, we need to deal with. It's like that quiet time, that shadow work. We need to deal with it. We need to face it. We need to wrestle with it. But it would be easier to scroll on TikTok. Absolutely. 100%.
Yes, absolutely. Well, in wrapping up the conversation, Hannah, where can listeners grab a copy of your book? I think the way it's crazy. I've talked about this like unplugging and the need to step away from our phones. I've talked about it a lot recently, but I feel like this conversation was still really unique. And so I appreciate you being here to share it with me.
Absolutely.
But where can they dive deeper into your book, The Unplugged Hours?
So you can find it at hannahbrencher.com. All of the resources are there for the new book, the Unplugged Hour trackers, which are completely free. And then the book is called The Unplugged Hours, and it is available on Amazon, wherever books are sold. So yeah, come and you know what? Like, if you pick up the book and you read it, that's beautiful. And I love that. But like, if you just take back an hour or two of your time because of this conversation and start to see how that feels for you, like that would be the greater gift.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I didn't prep you for this, but I ask all of my guests two questions before I let them go. And the
Yeah.
first one is, what's been a beneficial resource in your life that you want to share with the listeners?
Ooh, okay. I want to be mindful of this since we just talked about like, consumerism, but I will say beneficial resource to me has been, have you heard of the service Newly, the clothing
No.
rental service?
Oh, no, no.
So
Newly.
it's like kind of like Rent the Runway, but for like
Oh,
everyday life. And like you like rent clothes. And the reason that this has been such a game changer for me is I think sometimes, like for me, like I became a mom and then all of a sudden was like, what is my sense of style? Like, I don't
mm,
know because your body is changing so much. And so I decided to try this rental service and I've been able to like pick out pieces that I really love that make me feel good and confident. And I always feel like feeling good in what you're wearing can like set the tone for so many things. And
mm,
then after the month, you send them back and you order different clothes. And so it's just been like a confidence boost to be like, oh,
yeah,
I feel like piece by piece, I'm like reclaiming a sense of like a fashion
mm,
as as a mom, which I
yeah.
think can be really hard.
Yeah. I collaborate with Armoire, and it's a similar service. Like you
Okay.
get like 3, 5, or unlimited a month. I have the unlimited because then you can seriously get as many pieces as you want and send them back just by the end of the month. And
Yeah.
there is a somewhat high price point, but I think it's
Yep.
like
Hmm.
I would rather it's kind of like renting an apartment versus owning your own home. It's nice to own things, but what if you're a trendier person and you want to stay up with trends or you want to try something new and you're not adding the clutter to your closet? So I really like it, but I know it's not for
Well, no, I totally agree. Cause, I'll walk into like an Anthropology and I'll be like, that's beautiful. Like, but do
Mhm.
I really pay for that to then know if I'm going to wear it or not? And this allows me to stretch outside of my comfort zone a
Yeah,
little bit. And
yeah.
then also be like, you can go ahead and buy it at a cheaper rate if you love it. But I think it's stretching me to be like, oh, okay, let's have some fun with this.
Yeah. No, I'm someone that I love clothes. And so I know that I don't want to spend my money on it. So with Armour last week, I had a coral jumpsuit and I also don't wear color. And I
Oh,
didn't
yes,
love
me
it.
either.
Yeah, it was a little bit short on me, but I was like, you know what? I'm just going to wear this once or twice and then send it back because I'm just trying to step out of my comfort zone and do something fun for the end of summer. So again, I do
Yep.
think that playfulness that it can bring if you
I
have this.
totally agree. I
Yeah.
totally agree.
All right. Well, my last question for you is, what is something you can't stop talking about?
Whew, what is something I can't stop talking about? Oh boy, that's a good question. Now, what I can't shut up about is the fact that the seasons are changing and that it's
Yeah.
gonna be fall. And like,
Yeah.
I am not a summer girly. I don't know maybe it's the older I get that I'm like, really life operates in seasons. And so even just sitting this morning outside, it was like cool enough for me to actually sit outside and like go for a morning walk that I was like, I don't know. There's something about September being on the horizon that just makes you feel like a new person. Like it breathes fresh life into you.
Uh-huh.
And I love Halloween. I think there's something really fun about like going and seeing all the decorations in the neighborhood and just like the temperatures dropping and it's really cozy that I love this time of year coming up. But I'm very much the person that gets the memes that are, it's middle of July and you're ready to put the skeletons out. And so I feel like I'm about to come into my own because, like, my seasons are coming.
It's taking everything in my power not to buy that big spooky skeleton at Costco right now. I think it's like
Oh,
$250, and
it's
I'm like,
worth it though. It would be worth it. I think you should.
I don't think I have room in my budget for it right now. My husband's gonna be like, "What is wrong with you? This
Oh my
giant skeleton."
gosh.
Yeah. But all that to say, I'm the same way. I love Halloween. I like the spooky stuff. I think it's fun. It's
Yep.
playful. I'm not yeah, I'm realistic about it.
My
Mhm.
daughter thinks there's nothing cooler than driving around the neighborhood and seeing those big, massive skeletons. So there's a part of me that's like, you need to do it because it brings so much joy for other people, you know? Like, we
I
love it.
I love skeletons. I told my husband, I'm like, "I'm gonna get a skeleton tattoo." And he's like, "Please don't." But
I'm the same way.
yeah, I'm like, all of us are skeletons underneath our flesh, no matter what your
Mhm.
race is, no matter what your gender is. And I just think it's this thing that ties humanity together. And I think that's so cool. I just look deeper at what a
Yeah,
skeleton.
I was like, I've never thought about it that way, but it confirms my love for skeletons. Like when I was
Yeah.
in college, I used to have skeletons hanging from my rearview mirror, and I was like, I had no idea what that was, but now I'm like tapping back in. I was like, there's a reason I love this. Maybe it's that.
Yeah, I find it I've thought deeper about it because I'm like, what is this? This is weird how much I love skeletons. Anyways.
Well, I'm
Well,
glad you gave the deeper thought.
yeah. Then my little tidbit here at the end. But Hannah, thanks so much for joining me today. This was a really informative, helpful, convicting conversation. So I appreciate you joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.